wage theft in general is illegal behavior. It's stealing money from workers. So how does this happen? As Tiffany talked earlier, it's not paying workers the minimum wage. There was a big study done a couple years ago of 4,300 low-wage workers in Chicago, New York, and L.A. These are workers $10 an hour or less. This survey found that 1 out of 4 low-wage workers isn't paid the minimum wage. It found that when workers work overtime, 76%, 3/4 of low-wage workers aren't paid the overtime pay that they're supposed to have. Now, how does that happen? Well, employers just say, I don't pay overtime. Your position isn't covered by overtime. If you don't like it, find another job. But it's illegal. Then there's not paying all the hours that workers work. You're asked to work a little bit and then clock in. You're asked to clock out and then clean up. Or you're a poultry worker and you're asked to put on all this stuff that you got to do and then clock in and clock out and then take it all off. It's called donning and doffing. Or you're a school bus driver and you're asked to clean up the bus and get it ready in the morning and get gas and then clock in. And clock out at the end of the day and then clean up your bus after the kids have been in it all day. Or you're a clerical worker and you're asked to just answer the phones over your lunch hour, right? Illegal behavior. Or then you're a gas station worker in New Jersey. There was a case the other day where workers had, they worked 12 to 14 hours a day, and the employer made an automatic 2-hour-a-day deduction for breaks. But the problem is nobody got any breaks, but he just automatically deducted from them. Or then there's employers not paying prevailing wage. If you work on a government project, either construction or some sort of service contract that uses public dollars, there's set wages. So employers, when they bid on those jobs, have to put those set wages in. But they don't always pay workers those set wages. They pay them way below. Then there's kickbacks. Well, there's always been kickbacks in among farm workers, right? So they'd have to pay the coyote or the contractor a little bit of their wages each week. But we're seeing it around the country on construction jobs, on other jobs. In fact, we have a workers' center in Cincinnati, Ohio, and these workers came in and they were working in like a veterinary clinic. And they said, well, our employer likes to pretend that they pay overtime, but then, so they pay it to us in the check, but then we have to give them a kickback each week of all the overtime wages. And we were like, really? And they said, yeah, you want us to videotape it? And we're like, yeah, go for it, right? So they videotaped the employer asking for kickbacks, and, you know, it got on the television, and lo and behold, they're getting their wages these days, right? I mean, it's just unbelievable. Then there's the tip stealing. 10% of tipped workers don't get their tips. Right? In fact, my friends at the Department of Labor tell me, don't ever put your tip on a credit card because you don't know if the workers will actually get it. You know, I went to my favorite restaurant in Chicago called Tank Noodle. It's a great place. But, you know, I go to put my tip on the credit card. I turn to the waitress and I say, will you get this if I put it on the credit card? She says, no. Just, no, she won't get it, right? And then my favorite Indian restaurant, I just learned they got fined by the Department of Labor, same thing, stealing tips from all their workers. It's all around us. And then there's the workers that don't get paid at all, right? Every survey of day laborers in the nation, every single survey shows workers have all had the experience of working all day and not getting paid at all. And then there is payroll fraud. Fraud. This is calling workers independent contractors when they're really employees. This not only steals from workers, but it steals from the public coffers. It steals in payroll taxes, in workers' compensation, in unemployment insurance. This is one of the reasons we have crises at our state budget levels. It's not because workers are paid too much. It's because employers are defrauding the government and not paying their fair share. This is payroll fraud. Now, I'm eager to learn more about your campaign here because this whole dependent contractors, that's a new term for me, right? I mean, every time I think I've heard it all, I hear some new scheme, but it does sound like a scheme. So these outlaw industries that are defrauding workers and defrauding the government are widespread in construction. You know, we did a survey a few years ago of work sites for Pulte Homes. This is the nation's largest home builder, right? The nation's largest. So we go to the work sites. We didn't find a single worker paid as an employee. Every single worker was paid as an independent contractor. Most of them worked for these flat $300 a week wages. They would work 60, 70 hours a week, so they're getting no overtime. They have no workers' compensation. They have no unemployment. Nation's largest home builder, widespread problem in construction, widespread problem with truck drivers. I know Working Partnerships has been doing some phenomenal work with port drivers, right? Again, paid as independent contractors. I just learned the other day that the installers, you know, for those Dish Network and DirecTV, almost all of them are paid as independent contractors. They're not independent contractors, right? They're employees. They're doing a job for these companies. They're paid as independent contractors. Then there's janitors around the nation. They're called independent contractors. Well, you buy your own supplies. Yeah, right. And my favorite one, I was talking to a guy that works for the New York State Department of Labor, and he said to me, Kim, we got a call the other day, and we were asked to investigate gentlemen's clubs. And he said, can you believe I'm trying to explain to my wife I'm investigating gentlemen's clubs? Oh, yeah. And they were all paid as independent contractors, all the dancers. All the dancers in New York State paid as independent contractors. And then I've learned that's true almost all over the country. Again, this is fraud. It's stealing from workers, and it is stealing from the public coffers. So let's call it what it is. You know, sometimes people have called this misclassification. Now, what does that imply to you? It's an accident. They just checked the wrong box, right? This is not an accident. This is intentional fraud, and so we need to be clear about calling it what it is. So why do we have this kind of crisis of wage theft and payroll fraud? Well, clearly it's about greed, right? Greed, it's nothing new, right? We had greed in Deuteronomy. We've had greed throughout the ages. So this is nothing new. We have greed in our country. I think what is new or has deteriorated is the pushback forces against greed and the environment for workers that have made this greed allowed to just kind of take over. So let's talk about what I think are some of the main pushback forces against wage theft. First, unions. If you have a union, you're probably not going to have wage theft because they're going to make sure that you get paid what you work. But increasing number of workers in this society are not represented by unions.
7% of private sector.
That's right. 7% of private sector workers are in unions, and so 93% are not and don't have that protection. So I think the declining numbers of workers, percentage of workers in unions, I think is one of the reasons we have this expansion of wage theft in the society. A second pushback force that is actually a growing force around the country are these worker centers like Tiffany was talking about. There's about 200 of these worker centers around the country, different formations, that are really kind of stepping forth to play a role that unions have historically played, that social services have played, that government agencies have played. But they're small. They're doing, not able to see as many people, but they are playing an important pushback role in the society. Then we have our government enforcement agencies. At the federal level, the Federal Department of Labor has a division called the Wage and Hour Division. That's the division that's supposed to be stopping wage theft. Well, they're so proud of themselves because they've increased their staff. They're now up to 1,000 for the nation. So we're talking each staff person's responsible for 130,000 workers. We wonder why there's wage theft abounding. I mean, they can't possibly do the job. And you think, well, maybe the states are taking care of it. Well, in the nation, it's a little hard to get the calculations because they keep laying off all the state enforcement staff. But at most, there's probably 700 enforcement staff in the nation. And frankly, you've got 100 of them here in California, right? So you're like got more than your share. You agree, yeah, claim it. It's really, but it's nuts, right? You got the state of Florida, right? They have a lot of people in Florida. The state legislature voted out the Department of Labor. They got rid of it altogether. Or, that was brilliant. And then, Alabama has 3 enforcement staff for the entire state, and they're not allowed to do anything but take calls. So they can get a call, they can hear how bad things are, they can call the employer, so they call Eric and they say, Mr. Employer, will you please pay the worker? And if Eric says no, they say, well, have a blessed day. I mean, there's nothing they can do, right? They have no enforcement power, right? They can just call and ask. Well, so the bottom line is, no one is worried about the Department of Labor coming to investigate them. Again, this is an issue that can reach people because it is so fundamentally unfair that people would work and not get paid for their work. This is not complicated. And so it is, I think, a great time. We're losing on lots of stuff. I don't think we're losing long term because we are, in fact, having incredibly interesting conversations right now about the role of public sector and the need for job investments. So I think there's, hopefully we'll make some gains over the next couple of years. But right now, in a lot of the arenas, we're losing. But we're winning on this wage theft stuff, right? We're winning. We are winning campaigns. So I want to talk with you about the ways that people are winning on this right now around the country. First, we're winning state bills against wage theft. In the fall, there was an amazing bill that passed in New York State, the New York State wage theft bill, that does the penalties for, if an employer is found stealing $5,000, the worker gets $10,000 back. Right? It's called double damages. If the employer or any of the employer's friends or family members retaliate against the worker, it's an automatic $10,000 penalty. If the employer doesn't pay the back wages within 90 days, there's increases in fines, right? So there's this whole set of mechanisms to really strengthen the wage theft law in a time of great budget crisis in New York State as well. This was led by a group called Make the Road New York. It's a membership-based organization, and as they say, we are 8,200 families and 600 businesses. Right? And they said they kept saying 600 businesses, like a million times, right? Now, some of these businesses are 2-person businesses, but they're businesses nonetheless, right? And they talk about the importance of really driving home. This is, wage theft is, fighting it is leveling the playing field for ethical businesses. New Mexico and Massachusetts, within the last couple of years, have passed bills doing triple damages. So if you lose $5,000, you're paid $15,000 if they catch you. Arkansas, not like the hotbed of radicalism, they've got a bill in committee right now. They think they might get it passed in Arkansas this year, strengthening enforcement against wage theft. Illinois passed a bill last year. Ohio is considering one. There's wage theft bills all over, and we're winning on some of them. There's city efforts. Miami Beach. Now, I told you earlier about how Florida has no state Department of Labor. And so in Miami, there was a wage theft task force that groups like yourselves put together in Miami, and they came up with a enforcement mechanism for wage theft in Miami. It's done through the Small Business Agency for the city, and it creates an administrative structure. It passed. It passed in the city council in Miami, in the county actually, and now there's a similar bill in Palm Beach County, right? So again, it passed. Then, and you know, there are bills being looked at that I can't wait to hear more about the stuff that Tiffany's going to be doing in San Francisco. There's efforts in Los Angeles and New Orleans, and I mean, there's citywide efforts all over. Then there's places that feel like, well, we're not quite sure we could win a bill yet, but why don't we put together a task force on wage theft? So the first one of these that I know of that happened was in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Fayetteville, that's right. Again, there's a worker center that is staffed by 3 young immigrant workers, right? None of the 3 of them can rent a car, right? They're not 25. But they're doing awesome work in Northwest Arkansas, which is just the belly of the beast, right? That's where Walmart is headquartered in Tyson. And I mean, you know, they're just doing awesome work. And so they decided that they wanted to hold a forum on wage theft in Fayetteville. Okay, fine. So they asked the mayor if he would declare the day of the forum as a day against wage theft in Fayetteville. You know, and I don't know about your mayor, but a lot of mayors just do these proclamations, whatever. And so, you know, the staff for the Worker Center says, and we'll write the proclamation for you. So they write the proclamation, you know, that says wage theft is a problem and not paying this and that. So at the forum, the mayor opens the forum by reading his proclamation, right, which they've written. And then they have, you know, all these speakers and all these workers telling their story about wage theft. At the end of the forum, the mayor stands up and he says, well, you know, I issued the proclamation, but frankly, I didn't really realize what a problem this was in our town. And so I'm going to appoint a task force to investigate the problem. The next police officer hired, I'm going to assign to wage theft cases, and we're going to set up an 800 number to have workers have a place to call. So I think this is cool, right? This is cool. So I was telling this story in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I was like a couple weeks later, and there's this guy there, and he says, I know the mayor of Grand Rapids. He says, I taught him in seminary. Okay. And so sure enough, he gets, you know, 25 community and religious leaders. They go meet with the mayor, and he agrees to set up a task force in Grand Rapids, Michigan, right? This is a big town. And so they've now got a new task force that's surveying workers in the community, trying to understand the extent of the problem, and they're going to come out with a whole set of recommendations around doing a bill in Grand Rapids as well. So I think these task forces are totally, totally cool. And then there's all the direct action. Now, this is really being led by the worker centers, right? An employer doesn't pay workers, and people show up and try and get the money. And it's done. I know Tiffany could give you a dozen stories on how it's done. But it's usually you either show up at their workplace or you show up at their home. And, you know, you take a group of workers, you take a group of religious leaders, and you show up in their restaurant and say, we need you to pay these people. And we'll just stand here until you pay us, right? And it's a little disruptive to business. Or in Austin, Texas, we have a workers' center there, that does primarily work with construction workers. And in construction, the contractors, they don't like have a office except at their house, right? And what they've done is they've really they have like these prayer teams. So they get religious leaders and they have all the forms filled out, for filing a complaint with the Texas Department of whatever it is. But they go to the contractor's home and they say, look, we filled out the forms, we can file all the complaints for not paying these workers, but why don't you think about paying them? And while you're thinking about that, we're going to pray here on the doorstep. They bring their checkbook out and pay them, right? They were telling me the story not that long ago about, they had a contractor that they called up and they said, look, we had this problem before. We sent the prayer team. Do you want us to send the prayer team back out? And they were like, oh, no, I'll pay. It's okay, right? But this direct action, collectively, worker centers around the nation are collecting millions and millions of dollars through direct action. And I am such a believer in this direct action for a number of reasons. One, it gets money back, right? And it gets it back quick and faster than government agency or faster than lawsuits, right? So it's good. It's effective. Secondly, it's encouraging to workers to know that there are community leaders that will stand with them to get money back. Number three, for community leaders and religious leaders who aren't really quite sure that this is a problem, it makes it incredibly clear that there are people, employers out there who are flat out stealing money. And fourth, it gets incredible media attention, right? The New York State folks, when they won their wage theft bill, they talked about every time they did a direct action, they would try and get the media there, and they would talk about how this is why we need sort of the statewide bill. Again, you get great media coverage from these direct actions. So I think these direct actions are clearly a way to go. And finally, there's some new interesting partnerships being formed. We do at the federal level have a federal Department of Labor who at least wants to work with us, as opposed to the previous one. And there's some really good people in leadership right now at the Federal Department of Labor, and they've told all their staff that they have to work with people like us. But that doesn't mean they know us or know how to work with us. In fact, they often work in these offices kind of on their own. And so in a number of places, people are convening partnerships of the Federal Department of Labor, the State Department of Labor, the health and safety agencies, and and then community organizations, and putting everybody in the same room and saying, how can we do a better job reaching out to and protecting workers? So I think these community partnerships are at least another way to go. Couple cutting edge things that I think are new, but people are exploring. There's some efforts right now to try to figure out, can we get, there's all these agencies that help poor people file taxes, the tax assistance programs. And in fact, somebody told me that here in San Jose, you have one of the more interesting tax assistance programs. I don't know, but somebody told me that. We're trying to get some of the tax assistance programs to help identify wage theft. Think about it. If a worker comes in and they have a 1099, all you have to do is say, who decided you were an independent contractor? You or your employer, right? If the answer is, oh, my employer, they're not an independent contractor, right? They're not. And so again, you can immediately spot this payroll fraud. Or if they come in and they show a W-2, which is what most people should have, you say, do you ever work more than 40 hours a week? And they say, yes. Do you get overtime for it? Probably no, right? 76% of low-wage workers aren't paid for it. It's an immediate spotting of wage theft. So then, if you could do that and put that together with a place where people could, with the government agencies or with a worker center, just feels like there's some real potential on this over the next couple of years. I'm really pushing trying to get high schools and community colleges to do education of workers because young workers get taken advantage of. They work in retail, they work in restaurants, they work in sectors that are rife with wage theft. We ought to be telling young people what they need to know how to vote, but they also need to know how to protect themselves against wage theft. And we've got to be figuring out how we target some of these industries that are really stealing wages. And when we do this, probably the way to do it is in collaboration with unions that are really organizing in those sectors. I know there's efforts with the port drivers to both have organizing and going after their wage problems. The Teamsters are doing some awesome work with school bus drivers, where they're doing wage theft surveys with school bus drivers. And so they're both trying to organize and help them collect their back wages. So again, I think some collaboration on industries is the way to go. Let me close by saying a few things that I think each one of us can do individually to help stop and deter wage theft and payroll fraud. First, join the local campaign, right? I can't wait to hear more about the local campaign here, but it will need all of you in the area to support it. Secondly, organize some sort of study around wage theft. I've gotten bolder and bolder as I've talked more about this, because you can't talk about the issue and not have people in the room who've been victims of wage theft, right? How many folks in this room have been a victim or know someone who's been a victim of wage theft? There you go, right? Again, if you start explaining it to any group, people will know about it, right? But they all thought it was just an isolated problem. It just happened to them, right? And people think about problems differently when they realize it's not just them, it really is everybody. And so some sort of study, use my book or use some other book, I don't care, right? But do a study, congregation, school, community, let's get people talking about this. Third, ask how workers are paid, especially if you're hiring anybody, right? If you're hiring a contractor for your organization or somebody to do anything at your house or cut your grass, if you don't ask how workers are paid, you are probably participating in wage theft, right? Because so many contracted services aren't paid fairly and rightly. Leave your tips in cash, an easy thing to do. If you hear about a family member or a friend who's had their wages stolen, help them fight back, because it's not just them, right? Whatever that employer is doing to that worker, they're doing to a bunch of other workers too. And so it's really important, because it not only gets that worker learning how to fight back, but it stops the employer, or potentially could help stop that employer from taking advantage of other folks. And finally, let's talk about this with people. There's not that many issues where talking matters all that much. But it actually does help on this one, right? If we can get people talking about it, I think we can change what's going on around the country. Now, 9 to 5, I'm like a big fan, right? I've been a friend of Ellen Bravo for years. I've watched you grow and do awesome work. And I'm so excited that you are helping with this fight against wage theft, because I think your voices added with those around the country really can help stop this problem. Thank you. Paid the overtime pay that they're supposed to have. Now, how does that happen? Well, employers just say, I don't pay overtime. Your position isn't covered by overtime. If you don't like it, find another job. But it's illegal. Then there's not paying all the hours that workers work. You're asked to work a little bit and then clock in. You're asked to clock out and then clean up. Or you're a poultry worker and you're asked to put on all this stuff that you got to do and then clock in and clock out and then take it all off. It's called donning and doffing. Or you're a school bus driver and you're asked to clean up the bus and get it ready in the morning and get gas and then clock in. and clock out at the end of the day, and then, lo and behold, they're getting their wages these days, right? I mean, it's just unbelievable. Then there's the tip stealing. 10% of tipped workers don't get their tips. Right? In fact, my friends at the Department of Labor tell me, don't ever put your tip on a credit card because you don't know if the workers will actually get it. You know, I went to my favorite restaurant in Chicago called Tank Noodle. It's a great place. But, you know, I go to put my tip on the credit card. I turn to the waitress and I say, will you get this if I put it on the credit card? She says, no. Just, no, she won't get it, right? And then my favorite Indian restaurant, I just learned they got fined by the Department of Labor, same thing, stealing tips from all their workers. It's all around us. And then there's the workers that don't get paid at all, right? Every survey of day laborers in the nation, every single survey shows workers have all had the experience of working all day and not getting paid. Wage theft in general is illegal behavior. It's stealing money from workers. So how does this happen? As Tiffany talked earlier, it's not paying workers the minimum wage. There was a big study done a couple years ago of 4,300 low-wage workers in Chicago, New York, and L.A. These are workers $10 an hour or less. This survey found that 1 out of 4 low-wage workers isn't paid the minimum wage. It found that when workers work overtime, 76%, 3/4 of low-wage workers aren't clean up your bus after the kids have been in it all day, or you're a clerical worker and you're asked to just answer the phones over your lunch hour, right? Illegal behavior. Or then you're a gas station worker in New Jersey. There was a case the other day where workers had, they worked 12 to 14 hours a day, and the employer made an automatic 2-hour-a-day deduction for breaks. But the problem is nobody got any breaks. But he just automatically deducted from them. Or then there's employers not paying prevailing wage. If you work on a government project, either construction or some sort of service contract that uses public dollars, there's set wages. So employers, when they bid on those jobs, have to put those set wages in. But they don't always pay workers those set wages. They pay them way below. Then there's kickbacks. Well, there's always been kickbacks in among farm workers, right? So they'd have to pay the coyote or the contractor a little bit of their wages each week. But we're seeing it around the country on construction jobs, on other jobs. In fact, we have a workers' center in Cincinnati, Ohio, and these workers came in and they were working in like a veterinary clinic, and they said, well, our employer likes to pretend that they pay overtime, but then so they pay it to us in the check, but then we have to give them a kickback each week of all the overtime wages. And we were like, really? And they said, yeah, you want us to videotape it? And we're like, yeah, go for it, right? So they videotaped the employer asking for kickbacks, and, you know, it got on the television.